A man builds a company in a garage, turns it into a global empire, and is then publicly thrown out of it by his own board of directors. Most people would view that exile as the end of a career. Steve Jobs treated it as a beginning. The sanitized corporate biography often skips over the messy reality. It smooths out the details of a man who concealed his biological family ties for decades, engaged in extreme dietary restrictions that endangered his health, and ran a multinational corporation while taking an official salary of exactly $1. He was born in San Francisco in 1955 and immediately placed for adoption. He grew up in a working-class household, dropped out of college, and possessed no master plan for his life. That lack of a predetermined roadmap meant he had no fixed rules to follow. He had a blank slate, which left him free to assemble his own set of instructions from scratch. The first piece of those instructions came from his adoptive father, Paul, a machinist. Paul taught him to pull apart radios piece by piece. That habit of disassembling objects to understand their underlying mechanics became a permanent fixture in his mind. In 1972, he enrolled at Reed College. He dropped out after a single semester to stop draining his parents' savings. Yet he refused to leave the campus. He slept on the floor of dorm rooms and returned glass bottles for food money, staying behind simply to audit classes that interested him. 2 years later, he traveled to India on a 7-month spiritual pilgrimage. He returned wearing traditional clothing, with a shaved head, and carrying a new obsession with extreme simplicity, a philosophy that would eventually dictate the design of his technology. Back at Reed College, one of those random classes he audited was calligraphy. At the time, it had no practical application. A decade later, that specific class provided the exact knowledge required to build beautiful, proportionally spaced typography into the first Macintosh. These wandering phases served as the isolated data points waiting to synthesize into a future technological ecosystem. Apple started in 1976 inside the Jobs family garage. His friend, Steve Wozniak, provided the raw engineering genius. Jobs provided the overarching vision, the belief that everyday people deserved access to well-designed computers. The company scaled rapidly. Within 4 years, Apple went public. By the time he was 25 years old, Jobs possessed a net worth of over $200 million. Even the name of the massive tech entity he built had deeply untechnical origins. He chose Apple because he was returning from an apple orchard commune and adhering to a strict fruitarian diet. But by 1985, the internal environment had soured. The pressure of maintaining their early success led to constant, toxic friction between Jobs and the CEO he had personally recruited to run the company. That friction culminated in a boardroom vote. The board sided with his own hire. Jobs was violently pushed out of the organization he had founded. Stripped of his company and his identity, he faced a severe choice: quietly exit the technology industry with his millions, or start entirely from zero. He chose to build a new company called Next. The hardware struggled to find a commercial market, but its software architecture was so robust that it would eventually become the operating foundation for modern Apple devices, including iOS. During this same period, he spent $10 million to acquire a small, struggling computer graphics division from Lucasfilm. He renamed the studio Pixar. He personally funded the studio for years. In 1995, that financial patience paid off when Pixar released Toy Story, entirely validating the long-term risk. When Disney eventually purchased Pixar in 2006, the acquisition gave Jobs massive financial leverage. The deal made him the single largest individual shareholder of the Walt Disney Company. The decade that the public viewed as a failure was actually a quiet phase of empire building. It armed him with the architectural blueprints and the immense financial power he would need to orchestrate his return. By 1996, Apple was bleeding cash and sitting 90 days away from total bankruptcy. Desperate for survival, they purchased Next, effectively bringing Jobs back into the fold. He accepted the role of CEO, but agreed to an official salary of exactly $1 a year. He tied his financial fate entirely to his ability to rescue the dying company through its stock. His first move was ruthless simplification. He killed off 70% of Apple's existing product lines overnight, abandoning fragmented projects to focus all resources on a small, vital core. That intense focus initiated an uninterrupted wave of consumer technology. The colorful iMacs stabilized the company, and the iPod turned them into an entertainment powerhouse. Then came a locked-down, highly secretive internal initiative, codenamed Project Purple. In 2007, it launched as the iPhone. Surviving public ruin had removed his fear of making massive bets, turning his comeback into a series of calculated risks that far outpaced mere luck. In 2003, Jobs received a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. A hard, unchangeable limit was placed on his remaining time. 2 years later, he addressed the graduates at Stanford University. He explained that confronting the reality of his own death stripped away all remaining external pressures, pride, and fear of failure, leaving only what was truly important. According to his sister, in his final hours, Jobs looked past his family. His mind, still seemingly fixed on what was coming next, repeated 3 words: "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." He earned his legendary status by aggressively repurposing his lowest moments into the exact foundation required for his next moves. His life is proof that a devastating chapter is never the end of the narrative. If you lost everything you built tomorrow, what would you construct next? Let me know down in the comments.